Hi everyone, so today I thought I would film not really a tutorial but a video on like my tips for making backdrops for doll photography. The tips I'm going to share and like the examples I have are very simple, very basic, and very cheap. There are tons of other people on YouTube who are part of like the doll community or just like crafters who make much more like amazing, accurate, like scaled down sets for dolls. This video isn't like gonna cover anything intense because I like to keep things pretty basic and simple for my uses. So if you're looking for more detailed information and more involved designs, I recommend checking out other people's channels like My Froggy Stuff. For my purposes, when I take photos of dolls, if you like ever look at my thumbnails or you ever look at my Flickr account, things are pretty like unprofessional looking, and that's how I like it to be. I like my dolls to look almost surreal, like they're clearly dolls and they're clearly in like the human world. So I don't like them to look heavily edited or heavily realistic. I like to use, you know, my plastic doll accessories or put dolls of like different scales next to each other because that's how I think of dolls. I think of them as like, you know, little living creatures as part of my world, and that's how I like to kind of show them. So when I make backgrounds, they look kind of obviously, well, like homemade backgrounds. So you might not like these particular examples. Most of the photos I take have some kind of purpose. I'm not like super into taking just like pretty doll pictures. So when I do the majority of my photos, they're for like my doll guide on Flickr, where I document all the dolls in my collection, all the stuff I've identified for them. So I like things to be really consistent, and I like the backgrounds I use to be like interesting to look at but not take away from the dolls themselves. And that's something really important to keep in mind when you're doing backgrounds for your doll photography, that the color can affect the color of how your dolls photograph. It can affect where your camera wants to focus. It can just affect the overall like look of the picture. So if you put a really bold, intense background, that might make it harder for you to photograph your dolls. So that's just something that I've learned. I've also learned that some materials photograph better than others based on how they reflect or absorb the light. So one of the common things I see people use would be like sheets or pillowcases as backdrops. And I've played around with this before. I have like a photo series on my Flickr of my childhood dolls. And we did this shoot using a Hello Kitty sheet I had because I love Hello Kitty, and it was a pretty like plain looking sheet. But I didn't like the saturation that sheet left my dolls with in the edited photos. I had to like really edit the lighting. I had to really edit the saturation because it kind of just washed everything out, and my camera couldn't really focus on the dolls. So the quality of those pictures wasn't so great. I've also used pillowcases in the background, like pinned on the wall for like my reroots that I had. I had like collective groups of dolls I rerooted because I didn't have before pictures of them, but I wanted to show all the dolls I rerooted. And that worked out okay. Something that I've realized personally for me is that I don't like using fabric as a background because number one, it wrinkles, and unless you can get it really smooth, you can see the wrinkles. And unlike wrinkles on paper, I feel like wrinkles on fabric show up more. And I also feel like because fabric pills and gets faded just from being washed, that can show up in the photo. So I tend to stay away from that. But that is always an option, like just, you know, pinning a sheet to a wall or draping it over something, and you can find some really like cute patterns, and like it's a really cheap, affordable way to like reuse things. I also don't like to make the like floor and the background the same thing. So most of my pictures will be taken on this like laminate flooring that I'm sitting on. That'll be the base because I like to add depth to the photo. If you have like the same background and the same flooring, that's gonna kind of take out the depth from the picture. So that's kind of like up to you. A lot of people use like shadow boxes of like just solid white on the floor and on the background, and that makes it look like a catalog shoot, and that's really cool. But I find that it kind of takes the depth away. These backgrounds are literally just like the backdrops themselves that I'm going to show you. and they're all made with recycled boxes. Back in the day, on one of my earlier episodes of Dolly Diaries, I showed you guys, it was the holiday edition for 2017. We had bought all these like shelves to store our like play sets and like Barbie vehicles and stuff on, but before that I had big cardboard boxes like this one that's been taken apart, and I had, I think, like 8 of these that I was using, and I decided rather than recycle all of them, I would keep a few so I could maybe make backgrounds out of them. So I kept 4. I ended up recycling the rest just because they were so bulky. I wish I had kept the others. But you can see I have like my labels on here. I got these boxes at Walmart, I want to say for like less than $1. And these are the large moving boxes. These are the biggest ones you can get, I think, from Walmart. But you can get smaller ones. So that's something to keep in mind based on like what you're photographing and how much headroom you think you need. So for an American Girl, if you're photographing American Girl dolls or like 18-inch dolls, these really tall, large moving boxes are great because they allow plenty of headroom. I can show you. So I have Beth in here. And you can see, point it out, you can see that Bethan has lots of headroom, which is great for when you're cropping your finished photo. I always crop my pictures, and that's a nice thing when you have a background, is if you make sure you have plenty of room, you won't have anything like you know, this doll shelf here on the side. You can avoid having that in the background. So she has plenty of headroom, so if she was wearing a hat or a bow, there's plenty of headroom above it to accommodate that without getting like the plastic shelf in the background. So something I've had issues with in the past when I would just like tape up, say, calendar pictures on the wall, is that I didn't have enough like headroom above the dolls. So I would end up with either like paneling or whatever I was like using to put the paper on, I would end up with something unattractive on the outside of it. So that's the great thing about actually having an official backdrop. If you make it big enough, you can eliminate anything in the background that you don't want there. And if you're like me and you're taking photos for like an identification guide, you probably want the least distraction in the photo itself so that all the focus goes on the doll itself. These large moving boxes are really great, but you can get smaller ones if you don't want to have like something so bulky. Now I like to use the large ones myself, even for Barbies, because we have like larger play sets, and actually the very first backdrop I made, which I'll show you in a minute, that one was made just for the exclusive purpose of taking pictures of my play sets for my Flickr guide. And obviously some play sets have signs or they're just taller, so you're gonna need something big to accommodate that. So it's really important to think about like what you're photographing and how much room it's gonna need, and not just like so it perfectly fits, but depending on the angle that you're taking the picture at, so that you don't get anything in the picture that you don't want. When I take apart my boxes, I cut off like one panel typically, so mine are only 3 panels big because I didn't need them to be 4 panels big, but I do have I think 2 with 4 panels. And I also cut off the flaps, and I kept some of the flaps as like for other stuff. I'll show you. So like this flap here, I have a whole stack of them in this room. I use these to like as testers if I'm painting something. Like when I painted one of my backdrops, I think I painted like 4 of these, and I had like different sample stencils so I could see like what my play sets would photograph best against. So you could also make this into flooring and put it underneath. So it's good to save like the panels, and anything you decide you don't want to use, you can literally just recycle, and that's what's great about it. And if your backgrounds get really beat up or you don't like them anymore, you can literally just recycle it, and that's the genius of it. The only problem is if you're gonna paint on these and you want them to be dual-sided, because you can paint or glue stuff to both sides, is you have to keep in mind that a lot of boxes come with like these black labels, and it's not easy to cover this with paint, so that's something to keep in mind. What I used to decorate the actual backdrop is I used a bunch of just like things I had laying around. So the one that I was showing you a minute ago, this is kind of, this probably isn't for everyone, but, so this one, moving over here, is made all from recycled calendar pictures. I've shown it in Dolly Diaries a few times, but I always save my calendars at the end of the year, and I use them to decorate the back of my shelves. And what I did before I had an official backdrop is I would just use sticky putty and putty these to the wall for my like collection photos on Flickr. So like if I have a complete doll line, I photograph them for my Flickr. But I had kind of problems doing that because it wouldn't always stick nicely and they'd be put in a different position. So this is surreal, and obviously like that they don't, like, the pictures don't match. You only get one picture per calendar, but I don't mind because usually when I'm photographing, I'm only photographing like a handful of dolls, and I tried to line up kind of similar looking pictures. So, and then I flipped it to the reverse, and so the sky would meet, so if the dolls were a little bit taller. That might not be for everyone, but it is a good way to like recycle your calendar pictures. You can buy scrapbook paper and do this instead. Then the second thing here is you can obviously paint it. So this is my first backdrop I made, and you guys have seen this a lot in thumbnails. This wasn't made to photograph with dolls, so they don't photograph too great against it because of the color, but it's great for my play sets. This I hand painted, and then all of these flowers you see here I individually stenciled, and I just used a felt tip marker to stencil them, and I spaced things out pretty evenly in like a kind of brick-like pattern. So I measured the length and the width and made little marks every so many inches, and then I kind of like centered the next row in between, like in the middle. So it's not 100% lined up perfectly, but it kind of mimics like a wallpaper look. And speaking of wallpaper, this is actually wallpaper. This was just wallpaper that my kitchen used to be covered with, and I found the rest of the unfinished roll on top of the cabinet when I was painting the kitchen, and I thought this would be really great for doll photos. So something to keep in mind if you do buy like wallpaper, or you're using a calendar or using some kind of like printed scrapbook paper, is the size of the design. So these are really big, so scale wise it looks a little large for dolls, but if you're like me and that doesn't bother you, if you're not looking for like accuracy and realism, it's still cute and it still gets the job done. I had to glue this down and it didn't stick the best, but you can also staple things. And then the newest one I have, this is like folded. This is a 4-sider. So this is actually wrapping paper. I rolled out the gift wrap and I stapled it down instead of gluing it since it's a bit thinner. The nice thing about these backdrops is you can actually take sticky putty and like put photos and things on it and then pull it off at the end, especially anything glossy like this. And the glossier the background, the more light you're gonna get and the more saturation you're gonna get when you photograph, because the light is gonna, like, the flash from the camera will bounce off of it. So that's something to keep in mind too. Whereas this wallpaper is not glossy and the thing I painted is not, so it absorbs the light. So that's always something to keep in mind. Stapling really worked out, and you can't see the staples. They're very small. And I also want to add that the nice thing about using these cardboard boxes is that they all fold up super compact. You can see here I have all of them in this little skinny stack, so they fit on top of a shelf really well. They fit underneath the bed really well. Wherever you need to store them, it's super easy. They also, because they're folded, you can kind of angle them if you want your photo, instead of being like a straight background, to have a bit of like a turn in it. Those are some of the ideas. You could also use contact paper. I have some leftover contact paper from doing my doll shelves with it that you could use. Contact paper can be a little bit pricey depending on the kind you get. But like I said, the nice thing about these backdrops is you can make them pretty plain, and then for the given photo shoot you can just stick things on them and then take them down. So if you watched our As Told by Dolly's video, I used the same background for multiple scenes, but I hung up different things in the background to make it look different, and there was no damage done to the backdrop by doing that. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. Like I said, there's definitely a lot more involved ways you could do and a lot of other supplies you could use. There's like those trifold boards you use for school projects. That would work. But the cardboard boxes are honestly really cheap. You can use boxes you already have. Say you just moved, you have tons of boxes, I'm sure. So until next time, love your dolls, love yourself, and love your life.